Hello everyone, and welcome to Nighthawks, the show that is sure to keep you up at night. My name is Johnny, and today we are talking about a subject that comes up often on the show. It was actually the inception of the Nighthawks series on YouTube, and this podcast itself. Today we're going to be talking about Junji Ito. He is a Japanese manga artist known for his horrifyingly beautiful art, stories that tackle heavy subjects such as domestic abuse, addiction, and sexual assault, and shines the light of horror on these heavy subjects. I have two guests joining me on today's episode. We have Tyler from the Junji Ito subreddit.
Thank you for having me.
You can find him on the ProWeeb YouTube channel. And we have Jordan.
Hello. Hi, yes.
He is also from the Junji Ito subreddit. They will be joining us later in this episode, but first, let's take a look into Junji Ito's life. Ito began his experience in the horror world at a very young age. He began reading Kazuo Umezu and Shinichi Koga, thanks to his two older sisters. In the house where he lived, the bathroom was at the end of an underground tunnel where there were spiders, crickets, and such experiences were later reflected in his works. So here we have Tyler. He's from the YouTube channel ProWeeb, so I decided to ask him a few questions about the themes of Junji Ito and what exactly made it so effectively scary. I sent you a list. I'm trying to look for him. So how were you introduced to Junji Ito?
I'd say a couple of years back, I was looking through Tumblr with some anime artwork, and I came across the Hanging Balloons short story, and I was pretty interested in that. So it got me through a deep dive of trying to find out where this came from, and eventually I landed up on the short story by Junji Ito, The Hanging Balloons, and from there I just got more and more invested into Junji Ito. So after that, when I just started doing YouTube analysis of anime and that, I was speaking to my editor and I said to him, I want to do a video on Junji Ito. It's been kind of a staple around most of the manga and horror stuff that I read and watch, and that Junji Ito is at the top.
What other kind of horror media do you like?
Besides manga, it's mainly books that I read. A lot of H.P. Lovecraft. Really interested in H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos. And I'll play a few horror games, but mostly not popular titles, because for some reason I just think it's more authentic when it's a non-popular horror game. I don't really watch a lot of horror movies though, but it's mostly books, manga, and games.
What exactly about Junji Ito's stories really piqued your interest and kind of made you feel scared?
Mostly it's just the art style, but on the lines of authenticity, Junji Ito isn't really plagued by the standard horror movie with the not so scary monster and the cliche tropes, and that mostly Junji Ito, he really does he doesn't stick to that standard mold of horror, and mostly it's a lot like H.P. Lovecraft's brand of horror, with it's the fear of the unknown and the emphasis on just putting us in a constant state of suspense, like going on to the next level of a video game. You can't really go back and try everything again. You just got to keep on going, and that's the suspense Junji Ito traps us and the reader in.
What are a few of your favorite Junji Ito stories?
Well, a few of my favorite Junji Ito stories, my favorite one is Hellstar Remna. That one is mostly, of all these stories, that one is mostly related to H.P. Lovecraft, with the whole cosmic horror and entities that are beyond our reasoning, and we're just a speck of dust in the whole grand scheme of things. Hellstar Remna is my favorite, but of course the popular ones like Gyo, Uzumaki, and of course the popular one is The Enigma of Amagari Fault. That is probably my second favorite one.
What exactly through each story scared you, or in your words, kind of made you feel that kind of insignificance?
So with Hellstar Remna, that's the newest video I have on Junji Ito. With Hellstar Remna, it's a big thing of cosmic horror. It's that we think we're these like the best in the universe. We think we're the only ones around when the universe is so vast and we just know so little, and we're just a speck of dust. If you look at the whole universe, you can't even point out Earth, or just the galaxy as a whole. It's just with Hellstar Remna, it's a lot just critiquing our selfish views of ourselves as kind of we're the best of the best. And it's just pointing it out that when something bigger our way comes, we won't know how to handle it, and that thing can just wipe us off the planet in a second. You know, it's kind of with the H.P. Lovecraft with Cthulhu, in that when Cthulhu wakes up from the city of R'lyeh and just wreaks havoc everywhere, we're nothing. He can just wipe us out, and the outer gods will take Earth as their own. It's just that fear of the unknown, that is there something out there that can just wipe us out in a second. Uzumaki is probably his most famous work, because he takes something simple like the idea of a spiral and can twist this simple concept into something of unimaginable fear. Every single thing that happens in Uzumaki is related to the spiral, and it's just so many things, and it's just taking the spiral. It's a lot with the Fibonacci formula. It's a mathematical formula that has to do with the spiral, and it's the spiral being like this perfect concept, this perfect number. If you take it with the area and all that, we can get so caught up just in this complete spiral of our daily lives, and the spiral, which is our daily lives, eating, drinking, sleeping, it can consume us as a person and take away that individuality, that we're just a part of the spiral.
I feel like with a lot of people that I meet, their first story is usually their favorites.
A big thing with Junji Ito is, of course, body horror. With a lot of Western horror, it doesn't really focus on body horror. It will show gore in that, of humans being eaten up by this monster or killed by this Jason Voorhees look-alike, but it doesn't really focus on that body horror, which is twisting something recognizable, the human body, and twisting it in such a way that we can still see it's human, but at the same time it's something terrifying. The big thing with body horror is just twisting that recognition of the human form, twisting that and using it against us in this type of fear that is, this can happen to us, you know. We just like those humans, that if these things had to happen, the power of the spiral, the fish coming out of the waters in Gyo, Hellstar Remna, all that what happens to them, how their bodies get twisted and contorted, and that if those things are brought to real life, it can happen to us. He utilizes the black and white visuals to convey the sense of apathy, emotionless, that these characters are trapped in the sense of dread, and just these panels devoid of color, devoid of emotion, replicates that sense of dread that all of these characters are living in, because all the characters in Junji Ito, most of them, if not all, face this terrible fate, because it's just that the world is so much bigger than them, and if these things had to come out, we're just something disposable, like rubbish. And obviously for Junji Ito, what he does is this black and white allows him to convey this texture about the actual characters and horrifying things in it. This drippy textures, you can kind of feel it. You can kind of feel the spiral in a way that you can touch, as in just this thing that sucks you in. And Junji Ito, just with this whole black and white thing, it's just with he can draw really well, and just incorporating the black and white visuals with his artistic ability, he can create these monstrous things to truly scare us, because with manga, the only way you can scare the audience is of course with the plot as a whole, but mostly the drawings, and that's what he does. It's body horror, best kind of horror to use in manga, and of course that just theme of inevitable demise, that the main characters just start going down the staircase of spirals, and they just see the world as they know disappear, and they look at this mess of architecture just with the spirals and a world that's been there way before them, and they can't help just realize that it's done. There's no getting out of there, and they accept their fates, and they are sucked into the spiral. And it's with Hellstar Remna also, it's the whole planet gets destroyed, and when the main character Remna and the family they find and the vagrant, when they're in the bomb shelter just overlooking lost chunks of earth, they know that once the food is gone, they're gonna die. And it's just, these characters are stuck in this depressing situation, and there's no way to get out. And you can empathize with the characters. Like, if that were to happen to me, I would surrender myself to the spiral, or just surrender myself to the situation as a whole. Junji Ito makes us empathize with these characters, not only as a horror, but empathize with the whole idea that this is the end game, that after this, normal life isn't going to come back. I just want to say that I would highly recommend Junji Ito. It's Junji Ito is kind of the staple of Japanese horror, because Japanese horror is a whole different thing of its own compared to the normal Western horror. Movies like The Grudge, and that it's started with the Japanese horror, and Junji Ito just has these amazingly grotesque panels, and you really want to, like, something to remember is just these awful things you're looking at. I, of course, remember one of the first panels I saw, other than the short story Hanging Balloons, is the autopsy of a pregnant woman in Uzumaki, and just this awful mess of spirals inside the person, that it's inside the person, and it's just really good stories. I would recommend, and if anyone is a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, then they'll definitely like Junji Ito. But just my final thing is just check out Junji Ito. It's really worth it.
All right, thank you so much, Tyler. I hope you have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Here at Nighthawks Presents, we are excited to announce our new fiction podcast. Here's the trailer.
My name is Christina Glass. I'm an investigative reporter in Lake City, Colorado.
Every time we tried to visit, we would find nothing. Not even the frame of a house or any paved roads by the diner. None of it. The whole town was gone. Gone.
Now, today we have a new story on our hands.
I've been to this town before.
Has anyone heard of Cape Lock?
There's still time to stop this.
It's turned into, well, a story about a town.
Everyone on this list is a suspect of this crime.
One town.
Miss Glass, you're asking the wrong questions.
Cape Lock.
Where are you going?
A disappearing town. But I still have many more questions.
The truth, it's a powerful thing.
I don't want to be a part of any of
There's still time to stop this. There's still time to stop
Cape
this.
Lock. Cape Lock. Cape Lock. Cape Lock. Where is Cape Lock?
For more information, make sure to go to @the Nighthawks Podcast on Instagram. It will be released on July 3rd, wherever you find your podcasts. Ito first began writing and drawing manga as a hobby while he was working as a dental technician in around 1984, according to an article from Grape Japan. In 1987, he submitted a short story to Gekkan Halloween that won an honorable mention in the Kazuo Umezu Prize, with Umezu himself as one of the judges, according to a Da Vinci article written by Akiko Iwane. This story was later serialized as Tomie. Film director Guillermo del Toro cited on his official Twitter account that Ito was originally a collaborator for the video game Silent Hills, of which both del Toro and game designer Hideko Kojima were the main directors. However, a year after its announcement, the project was cancelled by Konami, the IP's owner. Ito and del Toro would later lend their likenesses to Kojima's next project, Death Stranding. So here we have Jordan. We met on the Junji Ito subreddit. So I also decided to ask him a few questions. What follows is the interview that we had earlier. Let's just start off with an easy question. So I'll just kind of ask you, like, what was your introduction to Junji Ito?
Well, I think like a lot of people, seeing that picture of Azami from Uzumaki with the spiral going into her forehead, I didn't know what that was a couple years ago, and I was just like, what the fuck is that? And so I vaguely Googled, like, you know, a picture of, like, you know, spiral girl forehead, and then I found Uzumaki, and I was like, okay, I like manga, I like anime, let's give this a shot. And then it was just an obsession. Like, I had to get my hands on every story he possibly wrote, like at Barnes and Noble or just anything. So yeah, it's been a pretty good ride ever since.
So what are a few like notable titles that you've read that you that really resonated with you?
Like, yeah, I really like the ones that kind of resonate more emotionally, like Earthbound and Lingering Farewell.
Which one is your favorite Junji Ito story in particular?
Definitely Lingering Farewell. So the grandparent, like, they were apparitions and they eventually like faded out. It's kind of how I look at life, because, you know, we're remembered by other people from how we interact with them. And so people remember, you know, the mannerisms, our greetings, our just like everything about us, or our essence in a way. And I think in that story, you know, it was more like the protagonist character, her name escapes me. It's more of like a humbling experience, and she kind of realizes like what's important in her life. And so, you know, she had like done what she needed to do with her like then husband. And so she wanted to just kind of go back to her father in the end of it. And so to me, it was a very like interesting way of going about that existential question of like, you know, how do we reconcile our mortality, and how do we like go about existence knowing that it's ultimately going to end?
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of Junji Ito's stories deal with that kind of question of our significance, and just kind of that burning question of like, what is our place on Earth, and just kind of as humans ourselves. And I definitely think that he plays on that kind of level of unknowingness of, well, do we know, you know, what will happen after we die? There is that kind of unknown aspect of it, and at the end of it, it's like, at the end of the day, you really don't have any control over that. And I definitely think that yeah, exactly, because you can't control how people remember you at the end of your life, and you can't control until you can control it, I guess, like in your waking life, in your alive life.
Right.
Yeah. What other kind of stories, like, why would you say it's so memorable? Where's the line connecting between why you like it and what makes it scary? Like, where's the connection there?
Well, I think, like we kind of discussed, I kind of like gravitate towards things that have a like overt philosophical undertone. So like one of my favorite shows is Bojack Horseman, and so in that show, it's a very like similar premise, how they're navigating these existential questions throughout these like really wild adventures. And so I really gravitate towards stories like that, because I think they're ultimately what makes his stories human. So like another example that I said, Earthbound, you know, he takes this idea of guilt and he kind of stretches it to this extreme that it not only kind of makes the reader look at the story differently, but it makes them kind of think about like themselves and how they view that situation. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's in those kind of premises that he can kind of relate to this human condition that is ultimately what people gravitate towards in his stories.
Yeah, I definitely think what's also interesting is that while the two are very different genres, they both very much also kind of dissect the same questions that we all have. Which is so interesting how he took, like how Bojack Horseman kind of takes the I guess I haven't seen the show, but from what I've collected, it's kind of comedic.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely a comedy, but I would say it's more of like a dramedy.
Speaking back to horror, what makes a story scary to you?
I mean, in the case of Junji Ito, you know, I think we kind of talked about this. He writes about kind of the invisible things that people just go about life not acknowledging in a way. Mm-hmm. And so I think he knows not only what to write about, but also how to write about it. Mm-hmm. And it's because like in, let's say, because I was reading a couple of interviews and he explained how he uses kind of the grotesque not really as an ends, but also like, but more as like a means to an end. So like again, the case of like, whether it's guilt in Earthbound or if it's like domestic violence in Glyceride, you know, how he was talking about these ideas that are very like primitive to people they don't think about. And I think someone like him, and then I brought up Ari Aster because his movies like Midsommar and Hereditary, especially like in Hereditary, a lot of Toni Collette's character, she has to go about life, and she kind of realizes that the events in her life are kind of predetermined. And I think that those kinds of things have a visceral reaction from the viewer, and I think that is what delineates good horror from bad horror, is when you kind of tackle these topics that poke the human condition in a way.
What's interesting is that we also had episodes on Hereditary and Midsommar, and just Ari Aster's filmography in general, and we also came to the same consensus that he uses the horror genre to talk about the things that we watch movies to escape from, whether it be family problems, a death in the family, guilt, stuff like that. So in a way, you're kind of, it is kind of a catharsis there, where you read it and you kind of feel like a satisfaction in the kind of knowing that it's like, this is something that is very difficult to grapple. But it is also kind of a conversation starter, yeah.
That catharsis you're talking about, like the topic itself, of like determinism might not be very like satisfying to think about, but the movies and the books of Junji Ito themselves are very satisfying to read, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely think they kind of, especially in the ending, like I said, like there is kind of that feeling of dread throughout the story, but there's some kind of conclusion, at least like emotionally, when you're reading it, you're like, okay, well, at least this is kind of the end of a story, and it's like it is it's a strange feeling, but I definitely do gravitate towards it. So when it comes to his art, I feel like that's kind of the big elephant in the room here, where it's like his stories might be great, but his art is also very unique and it's very impressive. And it's kind of what, like you said, is kind of like what got people into him. I think they first see the art before they hear about the stories, and so that's what kind of makes them gravitate towards Ito. So kind of just any thoughts on the art at all?
Oh, well, I bought the Twisted Visions book, the art book that he did. It's just so interesting to look at him like as an artist, because he not only does like his manga, obviously, but he also has like standalone pieces that are just equally bizarre. Like, I can't think of a couple off the top of my head, but his art obviously is what like gravitated me towards it, because I really like you. I think I really am curious about, grotesque things, and so I wanted to just like put the piece of the puzzle together, figure out like where the things came from. So that's what got me into it, obviously. But yeah, his art is just, it's so detailed. His art is what brings people in, and I think just the way he draws is just, it's so detailed, and he spends so much time working on it, especially like in the standalone pieces. It just adds more to the story ultimately. It's not just gore for, it is sometimes gore for gore's sake, but it just makes his bizarre world come to life in such a way that not a lot of people can do.
From what I've heard, he spends about 6 to 8 hours on a page alone when he's doing the mangas, and it's mainly usually just him editing the pictures and drawing them themselves, which I think
I don't doubt that.
Yeah, very, very impressive work. I think that's also kind of what draws to his fandom, which is where everyone just kind of realizes that he puts a lot of hard work, so we appreciate it a lot more often.
Oh, absolutely.
So any final thoughts, questions that you might have?
What are your favorite stories?
Yeah. So my first one was Uzumaki. I'd heard about it just, on the internet, and I found a copy of Uzumaki, an anime expo in 2018, and it was like a physical copy, and I was like, you know what, I'll buy it just for the sake of buying it. So I bought it, and I read it, like I'd say in about like maybe 2 or 3 days, because it was just such a good story, I couldn't put it down. And then after that, I kind of read a lot of his other stories, but there was the one, I forgot what it was called. It was like the red turtleneck, where it was the witch, and she had like the hair.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh god, that one freaked me out.
It was very disgusting, especially the part with the cockroach going in the neck. It was.
Oh, I know.
It was horrifying. But yeah, that was definitely one of my favorite visual stories. Is definitely that. And then I'd say probably I'm looking at my collection right here to my left. I don't know. I definitely liked Gyo of all stories. I just think kind of the absurdity of it all, especially at the end with the whole weird human circus thing, was kind of funny. And it kind of,
that was the only story that I had to like put down because I was like physically ill.
It was it was very disgusting. It looked horrifying. But I think there was also a comic at the end of either Gyo or whatnot. But one of my favorite comics itself, or short one shots, are his the splatter film, I think, or it's like Smashed, which is I love Smashed.
So,
So I'd read it when it was the fan translation of splatter film. That's how I always remember it. So every time I see it, it's like I refuse to call it anything else. But but it's a really good story, and I think it always comes up. It always comes up whenever I'm talking with people, usually about food, and they're like, "Oh, it's so good, you'll never want to eat anything else." And I'm like, "Boy, do I got a story for you."
I got a story for
yeah,
you.
exactly. And it's like it really stuck with me. It was just such a interesting kind of look into, like you said, like kind of what makes us human is that weird, very strong want that sometimes feels like a need, but it isn't. Yeah, and I feel like you know, a lot of the stories really tackle on that, and I feel like that personally is something that I struggle to deal with. Is like, what are my wants and what are my needs, and how do I control the, you know, kind of like what I want between what I need, and like how do I differentiate the two? It's like it definitely begs those questions, but I think that story is probably one of my favorites. Just structurally, it was interesting.
That's a really interesting one. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. I just thought it was like another like expose on like obsession, but yeah, that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, and that's also what I like about his stories. You could definitely see it from different angles and different lights, and come up with your own conclusions. But at the end of the day, I feel like every conclusion that anyone comes up with, someone somehow resonates with to some level. So there's
definitely.
Yeah, you definitely don't feel like there's a right or wrong, or well, maybe it's not that, because they all seem very plausible. Because that's kind of the interesting part about his horror is that a lot of it can be just symbolism. It could also just be gore. It could just be, you know, this and that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of, how does it affect our lives? And I feel like that's a good question to end this on. Like, how do you think Junji Ito's stories have affected you?
Mentally speaking, when I first read Frankenstein, I have this flag above that's like on my ceiling that I can like look at. It has like little symbols of like globes. It's kind of like the UN flag, but not really. And after I read Frankenstein that night, I had a dream about it, and it was like a nightmare or anything. But then I woke up at like in the middle of the night, and I swear to God, the Frankenstein was on the flag.
Oof.
And that was the first time I ever had like sleep paralysis. But then like my brain eventually like was like, it's fake, don't worry. So that was like a mental reaction. But I mean, like, ultimately, like from an emotional standpoint, the stories I listed, Junji Ito's not afraid to tackle those existential questions about, like, you know, existence and how we like navigate knowing that we can't control a lot of things in our lives. And I think that really resonates with people.
Yeah, I think coming to terms with that is kind of his end goal here, is kind of coming to terms with like, well, you can't control a lot of things. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I guess just thank you so much for coming on. Like, this really does mean a lot. Like, you had a lot of great things to say. I just hope you're staying safe and whatnot.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for having me on. This was really cool. It's my first podcast, so I'm pretty stoked.
All right, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
The dark themes that Ito tackled seem to be a way to let his audience cope with similar struggles. As we've seen with the other works in horror, such as The Shining, the real monster isn't a grotesque six-legged bug with a woman on its face. It's ourselves. It's humanity. We have our significance as humans.
We're just a speck of dust in the whole grand scheme of things.
And we have our ways of coping with that.
Junji Ito's not afraid to tackle those existential questions about, like, you know, existence and how we like navigate knowing that we can't control a lot of things in our lives. And I think that really resonates with people.
And I think that, as horrific Ito's art may be, his stories show that the true horror lies within us, and it cannot be defeated unless it is first understood. And that is one of the most difficult tasks of a human. Thank you, Nighthawks, for joining us. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at the Nighthawks Podcast for any updates, and go check out our new podcast, Cape Lock, releasing on July 3rd, wherever you can find your podcasts. Good night, Nighthawks, and make sure to read something that'll keep you up at night.